Welcome to Echo of Crime YouTube channel. When the judge said the words "no parole," the courtroom stayed silent. There was no gasp, no dramatic reaction, just a pause, heavy and final. For many Americans watching from the outside, no parole sounds like legal language, technical, procedural. But for the person standing in front of the court, those two words mean something far more permanent. You will die in prison. There will be no review of who you become. No second look decades later. No door left open for change. Once the sentence is given, the future is sealed. The rise of no-parole sentences in the United States did not happen overnight. In the late 20th century, America entered an era defined by fear of crime. Violent crime rates were rising, and public pressure pushed lawmakers to act fast and decisively. Politicians promised safety through harsher punishment. Courts were given fewer options. Mandatory minimums expanded. And life without parole became a powerful symbol of being tough on crime. At first, these sentences were reserved for the most extreme cases. But over time, their use widened. Judges lost discretion. Laws began to require no parole sentences, regardless of circumstances, background, or potential for rehabilitation. Once guilt was established, the punishment was automatic. The system stopped asking who the person was and focused only on what they had done. What shocked the nation was not just the severity of these sentences, but who they were being applied to. Teenagers, young adults, people barely old enough to understand the consequences of permanent punishment. In courtrooms across America, defendants stood listening to sentences they could not fully comprehend. At 16 or 17 years old, life did not feel real. Many believed parole would come later. Others thought good behavior might change things. But no parole meant exactly what it said. No chance ever. For families, the moment was devastating. Parents realized they would grow old and die without ever seeing their child free again. For victims' families, the sentence felt like justice finally delivered. The courtroom became a place of collision between grief, anger, fear, and finality. Once sentenced, the transition was immediate. Defendants were transferred into adult prison systems built for long-term containment, not growth. The environment did not care about age or potential. A number replaced a name. Routine replaced freedom. The future collapsed into a single reality. This is where life will end. No parole sentences changed the meaning of time itself. Prison was no longer something to survive until release. It became a place where every year simply moved closer to death. Education, therapy, and self-improvement no longer led anywhere. The system was not waiting to see who the person might become. As these sentences multiplied, public awareness slowly grew. Journalists uncovered cases where teenagers were sentenced more harshly than some adult offenders. Psychologists warned that the human brain, especially in youth, is not fully developed. Legal scholars questioned whether punishment without hope served justice at all. But for those already sentenced, these debates came too late. The moment America crossed a line where punishment stopped being temporary and became permanent by design. It is about a justice system that believed some mistakes should erase an entire lifetime. And it is about the sentence that forced the nation to ask a question it could no longer ignore. What does justice become when parole is removed and hope disappears with it? This was the beginning of a national reckoning. For those sentenced with no parole, prison is not a phase of life, it becomes life. After the courtroom empties and the headlines fade, reality sets in slowly. The first days inside prison are filled with confusion and disbelief. Many inmates believe, at least at first, that something will change, that an appeal will succeed, that laws will be revised, that time will somehow soften the sentence. But as months turn into years, the truth becomes unavoidable. There is no exit written into the punishment. Inside American prisons, parole represents more than release. It represents purpose. It gives inmates a reason to follow rules, pursue education, attend therapy, and imagine a future beyond the walls. For those serving no parole sentences, that incentive is removed entirely. Good behavior does not shorten time. Growth does not lead to freedom. Change is no longer rewarded. Daily life becomes repetitive and heavy. Count after count. Meals at the same time. Doors opening and closing on schedule. Prison routines are designed around the idea that inmates are moving toward release. But no parole prisoners are moving toward only one certainty. They will grow old here. And they will die here. Psychologists have long warned that hope is a critical part of human survival. When hope disappears, the mind begins to suffer. Studies of inmates serving life without parole show higher rates of depression, emotional withdrawal, and mental decline. Without the possibility of release, time stops feeling meaningful. Years lose distinction. Birthdays pass unnoticed. Seasons blur together. For those sentenced young, the impact is even deeper. Teenagers and young adults mature behind bars, learning responsibility and self-control only after punishment has already become irreversible. Many report that they truly understood the weight of no parole only in their late 20s or 30s, when their thinking matured enough to grasp what had been taken from them. This creates a cruel paradox. Personal growth arrives after it no longer matters. In prisons across the country, no parole inmates watch others leave. They see men pack belongings, say goodbyes, and walk through gates that will never open for them. Each release reinforces the finality of their own sentence. They are not on the same timeline. Their future has already ended. Families suffer alongside them. Parents age. Siblings build lives. Children grow up knowing they're loved, one only through prison visits and phone calls. Relationships strain under the weight of permanence. Some fade away entirely. Prison does not just confine one person. It reshapes entire families across generations. Yet many no-parole inmates still search for meaning. Some turn to education, faith, writing, or mentoring younger prisoners. They build internal lives because external futures no longer exist. These acts are not driven by the promise of release, but by the need to survive mentally and morally. It shows how a sentence without review transforms prison from a place of accountability into a place of finality. And it asks a difficult question. If punishment leaves no room for redemption, what purpose does it truly serve? The answer would soon begin to challenge the very foundation of America's justice system. As the years passed, the sentence of no parole stopped being just a punishment handed down in court and became a question facing the entire country. What once felt settled and unquestionable began to look different when viewed through time, science, and human experience. America started to ask itself a difficult question. Should any sentence remove the possibility of change forever? The turning point came when lawmakers, psychologists, and judges began paying closer attention to how people actually grow and mature. Research in brain development showed that judgment, impulse control, and long-term decision-making continue developing well into a person's mid-20s. This meant that many individuals sentenced to life without parole, especially those sentenced young, were punished for decisions made before their minds were fully formed. The law had treated permanence as certainty, while science suggested the opposite. These findings slowly reached the courts. Legal challenges argued that no parole sentences, especially when mandatory, ignored individuality and growth. In response, judges began questioning whether justice could be considered fair if it refused to acknowledge change. The debate intensified when it became clear that people serving life without parole often showed significant rehabilitation decades into their sentences, long after the system had stopped caring. Landmark court decisions followed, reshaping the legal landscape. Mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were ruled unconstitutional, forcing states to revisit cases once thought untouchable. For the first time, many incarcerated people were granted resentencing hearings or parole eligibility. Judges were instructed to look not only at the crime, but at who the person had become over time. But reform was uneven. Some states embraced change. Others resisted. Many individuals remained behind bars despite new rulings, caught in legal gray areas, or denied relief due to technicalities. Hope returned, but cautiously. For those who had spent decades believing release was impossible, the idea of freedom felt distant, even frightening. Prison had shaped every part of their adult lives. Outside the prison walls, the debate continued. Supporters of no-parole sentences argued that some crimes are so severe that punishment must be permanent. Victims' families spoke of loss that could never be repaired. On the other side, reform advocates insisted that justice should not erase the possibility of redemption. They argued that punishment without review risks becoming vengeance rather than justice. What became clear was that no parole had consequences far beyond prison walls. It shaped families, communities, and the moral identity of the justice system itself. A sentence meant to provide certainty had instead created decades of unanswered questions about fairness, humanity, and responsibility. It is about a country learning, slowly, that justice must balance accountability with the reality of human change. It is about recognizing that time does not freeze a person at their worst moment, and that growth, even behind bars, still matters. No parole, the prison sentence that shocked America, is not just the story of a law. It is the story of a system forced to confront its limits. And it leaves us with a final unresolved question, one that continues to shape courtrooms and lives across the nation. If justice cannot recognize change, then what does it ultimately protect? That question remains unanswered.